then I'm going to move on to today's subject. We are going to talk about Xunzi, but before we talk about Xunzi, I decide from now on I'm going to, not always, but I think that's important to remind everybody about the history of Chinese. Okay, so I will always have this table, but I will highlight what's important during today's section. We're still talking about the ancient Chinese. Okay, so today Xunzi, of course, is a warring state, and some people may ask why we always talk about warring state. Is there another time is better? It's a tough question, but I would say my answer would be Chinese is kind of more unified, harmonious. So instead of like Western, when we start in Greek, then we go out, become wider and wider, more and more variety. Chinese start from at the same time, Socratic time of Greek time, has many so-called 100 schools, and then kind of unify, become Confucianism. Okay, so that's just a general idea. That's why it's very important to know the beginning. And from time to time, I'm going to bring other philosophy thinking or literature, intellectual thinking, and in the later time. And I also need everybody's suggestion, either send me the paper or give me the subject, so we will include. And so here we talk about, in today's reading, we might encounter two important person. One is so-called Yao, that's a sage king. Okay, it's from the Mencius time or Xunzi or the warring state. It's about, I think, 2,000 years before their time. They always talk about the sage king. Why he's good? He gives the position as an emperor to another person called Sun instead of giving to his son. So that's great. And according to the legend, he's the wonderful sage king. And they talk about another tyrant, is Jie. Okay, he's a tyrant. He killed people, and then the China or the world is in a terrible situation. So that's the person we will talk about. And today, that's a brief history. And a few keywords, of course, I believe everybody know what's Dao, right? The principle. And Zhi, I just remind everybody, sometimes called gentleman, and basics in Confucianism's sense, we call it the moral actor, okay? But the original sense, okay, you might read, if you read today's article, they use the translation, they use is the prince, okay? So Junzi original meaning is the low-ranking aristocrat. Okay, so that's why it's called prince. Okay, so Confucius, okay, make it different meaning as a moral agent or moral actor. Okay, so in Xunzi's writing, kind of mix with moral actor and prince, the meaning. So that's I have it. And another thing I believe everybody should be familiar, which is Tian, means sky, means heaven, in the sense, not heaven and hell sense, it means the God, the natural God. Okay, so when all Chinese during that time, we will consider as heaven, as the supreme power, even the emperor for 2,000 years, all the Chinese emperors will consider they are the son of the heaven. And when the Chinese describe the entire world, they call it under the heaven. Okay, so heaven means, you know, it has a religious meaning and a political meaning. And another word we see in Xunzi's reading, especially in Xunzi's reading, is so-called Wu. Okay, my translation is about things. If you read other things like 道德经, okay, Lao Tzu's 道德经, he used a lot of words. You probably hear a lot of words like 10,000 things, okay? 10,000 things. So basics, 10,000 things means everything. So basic, it means everything non-human, okay? Material, tools, animals. So you will see the thing we can use. Okay, so and the resources we have. That's in the general text we are using. And another thing we use, especially for today, is the so-called wen, and the text translation is gloss over, or my translation will prefer to give things a proper form. Kind of the ritual, okay, but it's hard to explain. But when we go to the text, just pay attention. Wen is another word being used in ancient Chinese, and they have their own meaning. So, any question? So let's move to a little bit. We are still in the background about the some Chinese background. Okay, so just remind everybody. So I realized a lot of misunderstanding, because when we talk about the Taoism, okay, I think I and a lot of sources always mention Taoism is on the south of China. Okay, so I run into a question. One person asked me, oh, okay, that's why Taiwan and Hong Kong are more Taoism people, okay, and the people in China are more Confucianism, right? So I think that's basically is my mistake, because when I talk about South, if you look at the map, the red dot, that's Beijing, and Shanghai, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the Xi'an. Xi'an is the place have the so-called terracotta, right? Okay, so that's the today's China. But ancient China, if you look at, if I enlarge this one, you look at the warring state, the territory is only this big. So when we talk about southern, we talk about this area, which is still considered north in today's sense. So in this area, it's like south of the Yellow River, and probably still north of Yangtze River. Okay, so in today's sense, we don't consider as south. But when we talk about philosophy, we talk about it from south. You see, the place of Taoism is even on the north of Shanghai. And what's Shanghai during that time? Basically, it's, you know, according to the Chinese text, they consider the people in Shanghai, they tattoo their body and they speak like birds. Okay, so basically it's totally barbarian. And the Taiwan, Hong Kong, that's basically it's like totally barbarian. And the Confucius even don't want to consider, you know, they are human during that time. Okay, so that's the basic geographic information, and it's important that when we talk about the the warring state, basically after warring state, before so-called spring and autumn time, Confucius time, that time China probably have, we don't know how many, but at least many hundreds states. Okay, but during the Mencius and the Xunzi, the time so-called the warring state, basically we believe only 7 states survived. So some important state is Qi on this east, is today's Shandong, and the Qin is on the Xi'an, which on the west. These 2 states are important because Qi is on Sunday, if you see, it's close to the ocean, so they can make salt to sell. So they have a lot of trading, a lot of business. So in general, they are rich. And when the country are rich, they can support a lot of cultural things. So a lot of philosophers from this area. So if you look at, all the Confucianism, okay, are from Qi, this area. Okay, Mencius, okay, Confucius is not from Qi, but it's very close, another country. Same as Mencius. And today's subject, Xunzi, also, I don't know where it's original from, but he got hired, okay, in the empire, in the kingdom of Qi on the east, okay, and he worked there. So that's the story. And the Taoism on the south, which is the Chu, that's another big country, but it's on the southern part, and the so-called southern is still north of Shanghai. Okay, So the southern part during that time, and they probably speak that different language, but use the same writing character during the time. So if you read Dao De Jing or Zhuangzi, all this kind of Taoism writing, and then the translation, of course, you cannot tell the difference, but in Chinese, you will see the tone and the way of thinking is very different. And another person we are not going to talk about today, but it's important to know, is Xunzi's student. There is a so-called Han Fei. Okay, basically they try to find a job. Okay, so he traveled all the way to Qin. Okay, on the west side. Qin is a poor country, but eventually it conquered the entire China and unite the entire China. The key is they are using legalism system instead of Confucianism system. So they united the entire China in the year of 200 BC. Okay, that's the time they united the entire China. So that's the important to know, and Qin and Qi during that time, and that's the some historical background. I just want to make sure before we start, we have the picture right, and this situation is very similar to Greek time. During that time, Athens, right? It's kind of like a Qi and the East. They're full of culture, rich. Okay, so they have a lot of philosophy. Okay, come out. And Sparta, you know, which on the west, right, in the Greek time. I'm not sure they are poor or not poor, but basically they are the military state. So you know, during the Peloponnesian Wars, you know, they can attack Athens. Same situation happened in China. So that's the story. So any question, any comment on this background?
In order to ask a question, do we need to speak or we need to say something in the chat? What would be the best way?
I think okay. You can put it in the chat, but unfortunately, I'm probably not able to look at the chat all the time. But if anybody feel comfortable to type the chat, you can type in the chat and then somebody sees it. Please mention it. I will check the chat. But please raise your hand. We have how many people we have? We have about less than 20 people, right? So they'll be fine to handle to jump in, but I will prefer raise your hand and I will call you. That'll be good.
Then I have a question, Jason. If I can begin, Elena. This is Elena.
Oh, Elena. Okay, great. Okay.
Okay. So my question is, how? So that this concept of when to gloss over to give things a form. Yeah. How does it exist in both Confucianism and also Taoism, Lao Tzu also? So, or it's different, or it doesn't exist there and it exists there? Would you please just speak on that?
Well, at this moment, we can consider they all talk about the same thing. Okay, they have the same meaning. But I can say is Lao Tzu Taoism probably not talk much about Wen. Okay, and the Confucianism talk about a lot of Wen, which is related to the righteous, which we call Li. Okay, this one observation or righteous propriety. This one. Okay, it's okay. So it's related. Okay. I hope I answer your question.
Okay, so he basically says that Li observances of ritual propriety is directly connected to when to give things a form. Is that right?
Yes, I can say this way. Okay, we can agree on this way. Okay, of course they have some subtle difference. I don't think we have to pay too much attention at this moment. And during the reading today, Xunzi is talking about this. Okay, so we will focus on this later.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We have Phil and Kimberly.
Yeah, thank you for your history lesson. It certainly helped me to understand. So China was during spring and autumn period, and as well as the warring states, was not unified, and they were like independent kingdoms. But did they have at least some idea that they were the same people to a certain degree? Because I noticed the walls, I might have came later, but some of the walls actually divided what would be China from what would not be China at that time. So and it seems like the warring states was really a kind of a feuding among, quote, Chinese. So in that sense, did they have a concept that's a little bit like the Greeks? You know, you have city-states, except it's expanded in territory, but they all understood that in a loose sense, they were Greek, because when the Persians invaded, they unified together. So was that sense beginning to gel, and they were just quibbling like who should be the head of China, rather than like these were actually like Koreans and other people who are really outside, that they weren't that concerned with, at least until they unify as a kind of a unified Greek state, so to speak. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, let me briefly get idea on this. So it's not like a Greek city-state, okay? First, Greek city-state basics, they are trading, okay? Basically, they are trading posts. And in China, the so-called city-state or small state basics is feudalism. So they are family, okay? From the so-called Zhou, okay? If you look at the time, this time, Zhou about 1,000 BC. Okay, Zhou, he founded the country, and the way the feudalism work is very simple, okay, right? I have the 10 sons, I have the 10 states, and each son have the 10 grandsons. They're going forward, so become 100. That's the different situation. So during the spring and the autumn time, people talking about respect to the original, okay, the ancestor, the Zhou, they are respect them. Confucius is thinking about, they are fighting, we are brothers. Why we are fighting? We have to go back. Okay, but to the warring state, that's a different situation, because that time people already forget about we are brothers. They start to fight. They believe one person, one state are going to unify, okay, together. So that's a long story. We can talk about this. And okay, so I think I should stop here, and then otherwise we become a history meetup. So
okay.
Kimberly.
I think I got my question answered. Richard Lam went online in the chat. So essentially, Vietnam became involved after the Chinese unified. So they were part of the Han Dynasty, because that's what I asked about. It's like, well, how does Vietnam play into all this? But he gave me some good references. So I got some good places to start to do some research.
Good, yeah. Vietnam was occupied by Qing Dynasty. It's very famous because you see this area, you go all the way south. But basics, it's hard to say you unify this area, because when you have a criminal, the government just send people over there, and most of them will die over there. So it's too hard. I said about too hard. I hope it's not too hard for Audrey. So
thank you, Richard, for responding to me.
Am I next?
Yeah, you are next.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask about Li. You pronounce it Li, right? Just L-I-L, Li. I thought it also meant currency and money. I remember taking a course online with one of our philosophy groups. I think it was the Portland one, and we were studying the Tao Te Ching, and there was something about Li in there, or maybe it was Cheng Tzu, and everybody decided that they were talking about currency.
Currency, you mean money?
Kind of things, yeah, like money or what? Yeah, that's what they kept saying. And I just wondering, I never heard it again after that group. And so I always thought of it as something, it's appropriate, but for exchange, you know?
Well, the Chinese word for like the red envelope, like the lucky money,
Yeah.
is like the first character is Li, but but I don't it's not the normal legal tender though. I wouldn't say Li is like, but I mean I guess potentially, I mean I have to see the context, but like Jason, can you pronounce the word I'm thinking of? Like, you know, like but you know,
Li, right? Oh, you mean the red envelope?
I can explain to Li.
Okay, maybe I could. Good.
Li, it basically, Jason, they talk about Li, it's a gift. Like, let's say, animal that they got multiple meaning. Here's it's different.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, it's a yeah. Okay, then I understand. Okay, so the basically let's talk about gifts, just like Kevin said, you know, because it's further developed and just like Richard talk about. Is it Richard? Okay, then talk about the red envelope. Okay, because you give a gift, then that's how it's related to money. But here we talk about righteous only. Okay, in the Confucius sense.
Yeah, I think like sort of the gift in the, you know, or like in that case of money, it's sort of an extension of Li, whereas Li here is like more the kind of the core principle. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you,
I didn't
everybody.
mean to derail the group on something else, you know, but I was just interested, and it's used a lot in Chung Tzu. So and so I was just, you know, when we get to study those books, maybe comparing Chung Tzu to, if I'm saying it right, to the Tao Te Ching or something, we could talk about all the different ways they use Li in there.
Yeah, that's a different concept, but thank you for asking, because I find out a lot of time I explain in my own turn, and sometimes, you know, cause misunderstanding. Just for example, like I keep talking about Tao Te Ching, Taoism from South, so kind of mislead the group thinking about Taiwanese and Hong Kong are more Taoism than Confucianism. So I think that's my mistake. So ask question, you know, even you think it's outside the domain. Okay, outside subject is fine, you know, but if I think it's really outside, I will ask you to stop and put in a different way. So any other question? Okay, I make this chart. Okay, so that's because we have been, some people have been here many sessions, and then I made this chart before. I think 2 months ago we compared two philosophers in China, Mencius and Xunzi, and we talk about human nature. Mencius talk about human nature is good. Xunzi talk about human nature is bad. Okay, so that's a different. And then we compare, okay, with the Western philosopher Hobbes and Rousseau. Okay, which Rousseau think about the nature state is good, and Hobbes think about nature state is terrible. Okay, so I think I put the chart with these four people, and they are different in when Chinese thinker Xunzi and Mencius, when they talk about human nature, they talk about human nature in a society. When Mencius talk about human nature is good, he talk about human nature is good in helping other people. They have this kind of make the society good. When Xunzi talk about human nature is bad, he's talk about human nature is bad to the society because they fighting for things they do. That's not good for the society. But Thomas Hobbes talk about bad. Okay, he is talking about bad itself. Okay, it's not talking about the bad. Well, of course, you can argue but they consider human nature without the society. Same as Rousseau in his writing. It's not Candy. I forget the name. It's Candy. Okay, so Rousseau talk about the education. Okay, and then the way is to shield from the society influence. So I put this chart and because about the next section, because Xunzi's student is Han Fei, which is totally believe human nature is bad, and they totally only consider the society. So he even don't care about the moral lesson. Okay, the only thing is how does the society work? So I put the Han Fei in this chart on the left side, and the same as Machiavelli. Okay, it's very similar to Machiavelli, and I hope you join next week. And I'm not going to mention Machiavelli next week, but basics, if you read it, if you already read Machiavelli, you will surprised how close these two people. So another person, if you consider Confucius, and I will put that they kind of nothing much about human nature, good or bad, but Confucius more thinking about like society, and the Taoism, like Lao Tzu, is nothing about society and nothing about kind of like, you know, not good or not bad. So, okay, that's all for today's pre-reading. Okay, so let's just get a background and before we go to the subject. Any question? Anything want to talk about? Okay, let's start with today's reading, and today's paper, I believe, is very simple because only have 5-6 pages. Unlike next week, we will have 15 academic papers, so it's a little bit more. But next week, I will ask you, please focus only on section 3, which talk about the hand-face reading, okay, and others is more on the sociology. Okay, thanks. That's next week, and this week is easier. So anybody want to talk about today's subject? About after you read, you can summarize the whole reading, or you just want any subject you want to talk about during today's reading.
I was struck by how radical he was. It actually kind of reminded me of Marx saying religion is the opiate of the masses. I mean, I'm not saying that he was in favor of Marxism, but simply that he was basically saying, it sounded like he was sort of inciting people to revolution and saying, don't worship the emperor, because heaven is not going to help you.
Yes, that's very radical, but I don't think it's as radical as Marx. Okay, but I think it's compared to Hobbes, as a Hobbian probably more close. But you are right, he's very radical. If you put it during that time, you know, he is very radical. But his student, Han Fei, okay, we are going to read the next week, even more radical. So it's hard to believe during that time in China, I have this kind of radical thinking now. So, yeah. Is that Claudia?
Yes, I was wondering, do you think people today would label Xunzi as kind of like an atheist? Because he seems to be, he didn't believe in the, he was against ancestral worship and things, divination and prayers. For example, he says, he indicates, regardless of if it's going to rain, regardless of whether people pray for rain or not, it's going to happen regardless. So that sounds like a naturalistic approach. So what are your thoughts on that? What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, okay. 2 things I want to mention. First, okay, I will see if you say he is atheist, will you say Thomas Hobbes is an atheist? Okay, is an atheist. Okay, I think they are in a very similar situation. They kind of like, you know, drawing the line between heaven and the people, drawing the line between religious and the state. Okay, they kind of drawing this line, and then that's the first thing I'd like to mention. That's why the words Wen is important here, because that's his view of the righteous, of the worship. Okay, he's not saying don't worship. He just tell you it's not going to work. Okay, so just like you today, you still, well, not you, but a lot of people still go to church. But what the people believe, that's different than a long time ago. That's the first thing. Second thing, in Chinese is less religious, even in the ancient time than Europe. Okay, so in general, people believe nature God, which is heaven, okay, which is different than Judaism or Christian God, which is a creator, superpower God, that's a different concept. So if you want to criticize, or should not say criticize, or label ancient Chinese atheism, yeah, including Confucius is atheism. And then, but if they are not totally forget about the heaven. And the person who forget about heaven is Han Fei. Okay, that's a legalism. He just tell you it's totally no use. Okay, so that's I hope, Claudia, do I answer your question?
Yes, yeah, I understood everything, and I agree with you. No, but I wasn't criticizing him. No, it's
No. When I
have nothing.
I
have nothing against. I have nothing against atheists. No, I just. Yeah, I was just thinking it sounded similar to maybe some similarities between him and Marxism, or the ancient Stoics. They were natural philosophers, right? Many scholars consider them to be like atheists as well. They were the first atheists in the West, right?
Yeah.
So that's, yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, because the last time we talk about Xunzi, we compare Xunzi as because we talk about Mencius, which are more in the mainstream thinker in Chinese culture, which believe human nature is good, and Xunzi, who is against his idea is different than Mencius. He believes human nature is bad. Okay, so that's our last time comparison. This time,
sorry. I said the ancient Stoics. I meant to say the ancient Ionian philosophers, not the Stoics. Sorry about that.
Oh yeah, not Stoics. Stoics still believe. I think it's a Stoic.
The Ionian philosophers. They were, according to many experts, they were natural philosophers. Many of them.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so last time we talked about Xunzi and the monk. We focus on his nature, human nature. But this time we are going to focus on his psychological approach. So instead of go to heaven, okay, and a God or nature, metaphysics, he go to human psychology or talk about human. Okay, and we still label him as a Confucianism. Okay, so we will go detail. We are going to detail. Anybody have any thought about this subject anymore? How do you think about the Xunzi, the writing related to the Thomas Hobbes, the Leviathan? And in this book, in this writing, the author also considered the three philosophers in Greek: Socrates, Plato. Socrates compared to Confucius, and Plato compared to Mencius, and then he also considered Aristotle as Xunzi. Okay, in this way. Okay, so any thought about this? Any you agree or disagree on this comparison?
I have a question. I had before this meeting, I read the article on Leviathan in Wikipedia, and by the time I was done, I had sort of forgotten what today's reading was for this. Hobbes had talked about three types of government. There was either a sovereign monarchy, or governance by a group of people, an aristocracy, or governance by all, a democracy. Was Xunzi advocating one of these?
Anybody have an answer on this? Personally, I don't see. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Audrey.
I don't think that he would recommend democracy. That's for sure. I just think that what he was basically, this article anyway, is talking about that we need the government, we need laws, and we can't waste our time thinking about, heaven and the next life and all of that, that we need to really figure out how we're going to work in society, how we're going to, how we're going to be how we're going to act in a civil society. And, but the issue, it has a lot to do with what you talked about last time in terms of his initial feeling of human nature. I mean, his reasons for the need, the reasons that he gives is based on his feeling, I think, of human nature, and that we're not good, we're not basically good. And it's interesting that we have to put our intelligence together to form some kind of rules to keep us in line, which, our basic nature is not good, but we can figure it out. We can perfect it somehow through study or something. It's never quite clear how one perfects it from this article.
Through education.
Yeah, through education. Okay, but
education.
So there's people that are bad.
In Xunzi's point of view, human nature is bad, may not be a bad thing, okay? Because human nature is bad, but it's perfectible, okay?
Right.
So that's his idea, okay? So basically, he said, I think there's one text, it's not included here. He's talking about why people want to eat, because they are hungry. Why people want to drink, because they are thirsty. So he used this one to argue against the Mencius. Why people were doing good things? Because their nature is bad. Okay, so that's his argument. Okay, so I think we will go over some texts if we have time. Okay, about how he argued on the human nature is bad, and we can compare with how Mencius argued. So he has one famous article writing about he criticizing 12 12 teachers, okay? So which include Mencius, of course, and also include Huizi, which is logician, okay? Not logician, sophist during that time, okay? So I talk too much, so that's the thing. So how do you think about his how do we still think he is Confucianism? Because it's tradition. Yeah.
Hi, Jason. I met you in hi, Jason.
I haven't seen you for a long time.
Yeah, I've been busy, but yeah, I actually find Xunzi and Confucianism a little bit kind of similar, even though it's coming from very different angles. But the fact that Confucianism is really focusing on the hierarchy, how people should behave towards each other, towards your parents, to the ruler, your brothers and sisters. It's almost as if Confucianism doesn't put a lot of trust in human nature. And therefore Confucius sets out a lot of rules to kind of tell them what to do, because he doesn't trust that they would just know, they were just born to know these things. And that Xunzi, first of all, I never studied Xunzi, but from the article and the lecture, I feel that he, of course, the biggest theory is that he believed human nature are not good, and therefore I believe that he must put in a lot of theories on how to organize people in the society based on the notion that people are no good, and therefore they must be somehow organized in a way so that the society can function. And that also means the same thing as Confucianism, putting a lot of rules or rules and telling people what to do, so that they don't turn to bad. They will try to turn from good to good, try to turn from bad to good. Yeah, that's my thought.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I think you make a very good point, and it's kind of wake me up on the one situation. So think about this situation. Xunzi talk about human nature is bad, but he is not trying to build a system to organize people, okay, to make them total good. He think about the education, okay. So we may read, or we read before on the very first chapter of the Xunzi. Xunzi talk about so-called explosion of learning. He is talking about learning is important. So Xunzi talk about, since the human nature is bad, so we need education. People need to learn, that will become good. That's Xunzi's point of view. But the dangerous part, well, I should not use danger, okay, in the more neutral, he's a student, two famous students. One is Han Fei, another is Li Si, totally become legalism, which is just like others you talk about how they think about is not education. They think about like how to organize people, okay? How to organize people, set a lot of political system, okay? So you can organize people for the greater good, but the greater good basically talk about the good for the kingdom. So they are working for the Qin, the kingdom of Qin on the west side. So the Qin kingdom become a powerful kingdom and eventually conquered the entire China and the United. So that's the story, okay, the historical story. And then you get the point. If we think about, if I believe human nature is bad, there's a two way we can do, right? One is educate the people, make them become good. Another way is just recognize they are bad, like animal, okay? So they have used two tools, reward and the punishment. And I organize them to the greater good, which is the good for the state. So that's the legalism we are going to talk about next week. Okay,
thank you. That's very good. And so do you think he has some similarity with Confucianism or different?
That's the question I'm asking the group. Okay, I will welcome. I will put this one. Okay, why we still think about he is Confucius? Okay, so let's go to, I think who's hand first. Let's go to Phil, Claudia, and Audrey.
Yeah, I could see that he would still be a Confucian in the sense that if human nature is bad, then in a sense, social structures through culture, through human organization could at least moderate the bad, and through education could train them in a way to be good. The problem I have with it, human nature is bad to begin with. How did they get the good news to educate them?
Right.
There must be, in some sense, some enlightenment either coming from heaven or from a sage who knew good. But that maybe if that's so, then he is not human because he is like able to understand good in order to construct a society that would moderate people and train them to be good. So in some sense, there's kind of a contradiction. I could understand what, when you set up a system already, you could either coerce them or educate them to moderate the badness or train them to the goodness. The only other escape is like I said, a sage, or else you have to come to the point that human nature must at least be a blend of good and bad. So therefore you emphasize the good that's within them, that's within him as well. Because how did he become good enough to understand that in order to construct a society that would manifest goodness?
Thank you, Phil. And I think right now we have two questions on the table, right? First is how do we still classify, okay, Xunzi as a Confucianism, and then and the second question is, yeah, I feel make a good question. You know, if human nature is bad, okay, and you believe education, and who is the educator, right? The people are bad, right? So must have some divine power or something. Okay. So let's go to Claudia.
Yeah, I just my observation seems that the Confucianism within Xunzi's there is some Confucianism. It means in the sense that goodness or virtue has to come from outside. It has to be cultivated, which is similar, which is in line with Confucius's view on virtue, like through, for example, ritual propriety, for example, because Xunzi believes that because badness is innate in humans, it's inside, it's internal. The solution cannot come from within because humans are innately immoral or bad, right? So it has to come from outside sources, external, right? Through education, which is in line with, I guess, with Confucius, but in different ways. I don't believe Confucius does not believe that humans are naturally evil or bad, right?
No.
But the methods of making them become good, you know, the cultivating the virtue, the goodness, cultivation, right, which is found in both men, right, both philosophers, is external. The source is external, I believe, through, you know, practice, through education, you know, from listening to the people who are wiser, you know, teachers, right, not from within. That's my take on it. But I'm not sure if it's totally accurate or not. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I think a very good point. And don't worry about accurate or not. There's nothing so-called accurate. So we have Audrey, please.
Yeah, I'm looking right at the article, and actually that last sentence right before the section of a shock to the system I'll read it. That is about as unambiguous a statement, meaning Xunzi, of the impotence of religiosity and the primacy of purely human action that you will see in this side of Pietro Pomponazzi. And it could also have come from a culture where the lawmaker and this philosophical theorist were one and the same, which for me means that he's saying you don't need to go beyond working in society, that you can actually figure things out just like a philosopher. A philosopher doesn't have to believe where did logic come from? You know, I mean, it doesn't come from God necessarily. They're looking at what's tangible to them and their teaching. And so the more that you relate with the particular society that you're in, you can learn different things. And then some people get smarter and go deeper in their research, and some people don't, and they can teach. They use their skills in different ways. And he's using, then it goes down to, you're talking about Confucius and what he thinks about it. It basically says in the next section, close to the end, the last paragraph, closer to the end, he defended the Confucian funerary practices, not in the name of I hate these words, a propitiation of ancestral spirits or reward from heaven, but as a beautiful and useful way of transitioning people through the pangs of grief. Thus, sacrificing to the spirits is not about receiving tangible gain. It is about having a recognized vehicle for cathartically purging anguish. And I think that, you know, he's onto something here, that basically there's some sense of ritual that can keep us, you know, I mean, there's a ritual that Confucius already organized the ritual. He's saying it's ancestral worship. Xunzi is, how do you say his name? Xunzi? Xunzi?
Xunzi.
Xunzi.
Xunzi. Okay.
Xunzi. So basically he's saying that you can do this, you know, without, you know, it doesn't have to be the reason. The motivation behind Confucianism is not necessarily the motivation, but it's useful. And he's always talking about use your gifts and right action. And so this to him is right action. Go right to the heart. You know, use this ritual to start thinking about organizing your thoughts and your actions.
So
I
let
like-
me, Audrey, thank you. I think you hit a good point. One thing you talk about. I assume you are answering Phil's question about how does the good teacher, right? Human nature is bad.
Both
How,
questions,
yeah.
yeah.
So that's put this way. Okay. So you, according to the text, you point out that because the philosophical theorist, okay, we're gonna say, so use the philosophical thinking could help. You know,
Right.
I think that you make a very good point. Okay. That's why I so appreciate of the group like this, because people from outside a lot of time point out something, okay, to think I have been reading for many years and I never pay attention. So Audrey make a point, okay, and also which is mentioned in this text, talk about philosophical theory. If you read, I read the original Chinese text, Xunzi's writing, I like it so much because it's different than other philosophers. It's very logical. A lot of logical thinking, and that's why in this article, the author also called Xunzi a logician, okay, which is unusual, okay, in an early Chinese philosopher, because they don't, kind of not in the Western sense as a philosopher logical way of thinking, but Xunzi's writing is very logical, okay, and I believe just like Audrey and the author here mentioned about the philosophical theories that could be provided teaching. And another thing I noticed is to answer another answer I have for Phil's question, who is going to teach it, okay? Because Xunzi is conservatism, okay? He want to go back to old society. He want people to read the old text. When I say old, that means 1,000 years older than Confucius time, okay? The very old text, okay, to read it, because that's why we call him conservatism, and we still classify him as Confucianism because it's conservative and look at backward to the old time. Yeah. We have Jerry, please.
Well, after that very intelligent, conversation, I'm gonna dumb this down now and say, is Xunzi just simply considered Confucian because he was considered a disciple, or he started out in a Confucian school? I'm thinking, Aristotle was Plato's student, so in a sense, you could say Aristotle's Platonic, even though he diverged from him. Is it just conventional? Xunzi started out as a Confucian or disciple of Confucius, therefore people think of him as Confucian.
Thank you for asking this question. I believe a lot of people have this kind of thinking. So it's very different. Okay, they never met each other. Okay, Mencius, okay, is even just like Saint Paul. Okay, even Saint Paul never met Jesus, but Saint Paul at least lived in the same time, right? But Mencius is like, I think it's about 150 years later than Confucius. He only to connect to Confucius. Confucius is his teacher is Confucius' grandson. Okay, 子思 is grandson. Okay, that's how it related. Okay,
I see.
Xunzi, I don't know who is his teacher, but remember the map I showed at the beginning. He also in the Qi on the east side, the rich state, kingdom, the state he studied there, and they have a full of Confucianism thinking. In today's Shandong, okay, if you visit China, the Shandong still have the temple for Confucius. That's the place the Confucianism coming from. So he's doing that, and that's the how they related to Confucius. Okay, but they don't see each other. I think he probably 100 years later than Mencius, so they don't see each other. That's why you only see Xunzi criticize Mencius, and Mencius never criticized Xunzi because he was dead already. So
so then are people referring to Xunzi as Confucian just because they're taking this loose relationship and they're just overemphasizing it?
I don't see it's a loose emphasis. Again, that's just my opinion. First, traditionally, Chinese scholar classify Xunzi as Confucius. Okay, so right now I provide my own reason. I don't see because their geographic or teacher-student relation. I see the reason is first, both Xunzi focus on education. Okay?
Gotcha.
Secondly, he focused on old texts. Okay, when you talk about education, what subject to educate? The ancient text. When I say ancient, that's 1,000 years or at least 500 years before Confucius' time. So I think that's the reason. And they focus. There's a lot of moral value. They are similar. Talking about the righteous, talking about the filial piety, okay, human relationship, okay, all this kind of thing. That's why they can. Now, again, that's just my opinion. And
right.
Phil, please.
Yeah, I like your explanation about looking to the past, the golden age or whatever. I mean, because rather than just pure logic that allow you to reach this sense of perfection, because the first thing that happens, in a way, is never should really not be included as the tradition, because it was outside of the tradition. As an example, let's say you invented baseball. Only later on you say, well, you were playing baseball, and then somebody might ask, well, were you playing baseball then? He said, well, come to think of it, we were playing baseball, although when we invented it, we didn't know what it was. The problem with it, in a sense, is that it looks backwards rather than forwards, in a sense, because the past is really is the best. We need to retrieve it. The same actually goes to Plato in a sense, because the idea of the past, the form, we already know that. We just got muddled up, whether it's a state of war or whatever, or dust falling on the mirror, whatever the reason is. If we could only recuperate the idyllic tradition, we could then have what was, in a sense, the good that was constructed in that sense. So in some sense, that's why they kind of, in a sense, honor the sages, because they were the founders and they were different from us. We could only actually learn from them, but they were almost like gods, because they actually started a tradition that would allow us to now be educated. We only could recuperate all that understanding and teach it. So we are living at that time now, and it was really good when we didn't have all this evil in society, and now we could retrieve it. But unfortunately, that's a conservative position that doesn't realize that the future could also provide answers. So in that sense, I agree with you totally. They were exceptional people in the past. We could only, at best, mirror what their understanding is.
So you think that, okay, that is summarize what you said, that time they all look at backward. Okay, that's the first thing. Okay, second, you think that's good or not good?
I think ultimately was not good, because it freezes things in the form that they were at the idyllic moment. And you wonder whether the idyllic moment was ever really ideal, whether that was a kind of myth or a thing that's cast on it. Those people who were the original founders probably were not those kind of people that you thought they were.
I think just make right words about idea. So if you compare to Plato's, right? Plato always talk about idea, right? So the idea, okay, which is vague, is in the form, it never exists. Okay, but I think if you interpret in the Platonic term in Chinese ancient philosophy, the always backward looking actually in a way is an idea, which is too long ago. We have no way to verify. So it's kind of, if you take in a negative way, it's backward and too conservative, never make progress. But in another way to explain it, it's considered as a Platonic idea, which is pure, clean, absolute beauty, okay, absolute justice, okay, but never exists. So that's another way to think it. Just share a story. Just before I joined, I started this meeting. I was in a Chicago group. They are reading Zhuangzi. Okay, so when I read, and Eric, the organizer, just mentioned about, well, you talk about the Yao and the Sun. That's the ancient sage king. And then they talk about yellow emperor, which is older than them, 2000. They talk about older than them. So well, seems like the older the better. Yeah, it's strange. Yes, it's strange. But the fact is, when we talk about, I talk about ancient Chinese, we talk about something, the older the better. That's the basic assumption. You don't have to question. But so, but in the Platonic term, you will say more pure. Okay, so. Okay, so any other thing, any other question or any subject want to discuss on this one? Alex, please.
Yeah, actually, now that I heard so much more about this, I really feel like if people took more attention about what Xunzi is really saying, it would have been changed the course of history of China, maybe, because as I don't know if everybody knows, but because Confucianism is mostly very terrible for Chinese history, because it created too much rituals, too much rules, and it really has bogged down the advancement of the Chinese history, because all the rules that set in. So Xunzi, he really kind of pointed out the exact weakness in the Confucianism, that you should not, focusing so much on all these rituals and these things, and that you should, instead, be more logical, be more educated. But at the same time, I also don't understand why Xunzi, he's not more technical, such as advancement of science. So, but at the same time, I think that if China back then, all these thousands of years did not put so much emphasis on Confucianism and actually use more of his theory, you would have, advanced China probably, a lot faster, because China, all these thousands of years are so heavily bogged down by all these rituals and, li, the li, so heavy on that. And people cannot think freely, So yeah, that's just what I have to say.
Thank you, Alex. And I will consider this one your personal opinion, and then I have the same opinion as you are thinking. Okay, so I know it's a personal thinking, and then not everybody think this way, and I appreciate you speak for my mind. Yeah, thank you. And then to answer your question,
I have a question, and I'm not sure, because I raised the hand a while ago, but it's, you
sorry,
have lots of people.
Yeah, sorry. Okay,
and this is Elena.
Yeah, Elena.
My question is, so if we go to this diagram with 4 sectors, so assuming that society without human nature, without society is good, and we go into this quadrant where is Jean-Jacques Rousseau in Europe, and I didn't write down who is there in the East. So if we just assume that human nature as it's given is perfect, and then the society creates all these rules and systems that corrupt a human being. So what would be, from the just applying all these philosophies and ideas, what would be the way to return back to the original human nature as it is? Thank you.
Okay, so is anybody want to answer Rena's question? I think your question is, let's put on hold. Sorry, no, it's let's put on the later part to discuss. It's I think a little bit subjective, and the answer could be very subjective. Sorry about that. So probably we'll have a lot of opinion on that. I do want to spend about 20 minutes, 15 minutes to go through the text. Okay, I know not everybody likes text, but I think I try not to do too much, but I also try to introduce the text a little bit. So let me quickly answer Alex the point about Xunzi. Personally, I like Xunzi a lot. Okay, and which is not being focused in Chinese education. If you go to the street to find any Chinese from Taiwan or China or Hong Kong, ask them about Xunzi, they probably only tell you his human nature is bad. That's it, nothing else, because the school not teaching him much. I like him for two reasons. First, he is very practical. He think about, he separated, what's the words? Audrey doesn't like spirit propitiation. Okay, he considered the religion worship is like a spirit propitiation. Okay, so I think that's also close to the word we introduced at the beginning, so-called wen. Okay, gloss over or give a proper form. That's the part. And second part I like a lot is his logical thinking, because I like his writing. It's very clear, no tour around, just very clear. Human nature is bad. Why? Just talk about and conclude. Okay, we need education. Very simple. I like this kind of argument. So that's why I like him. But one of the reasons he is not popular is he has two famous students. We are going to introduce is Han Fei and Li Si, which is travel along to the Qin dynasty on the west to help the country united China. But and then in 15 years the country corrupt. So all the Confucian scholars start to talk about, okay, see, this kind of philosophy is bad. You see, have the legalism, which was sourced from Xunzi, blah 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 blah. Okay, so not being focused. That's just my view on that. And one thing we may want to talk about later, okay, is about Alex's question. Why Chinese philosopher never focus? Not only Xunzi. Okay, I think in the text, the author mentioned, okay, Xunzi, compare Xunzi and Thomas Hobbes, right? Thomas Hobbes not only interested on the human nature, Thomas Hobbes also spent a lot of writing, okay, about science, okay, but Xunzi is never talking about this. And for all Chinese philosophers, two things they don't pay much attention. First is God, okay, not pay much attention on that. Second is science, okay, why heat generate, why rock or why apple will fall from the apple tree. They don't ask this nonsense question. They are more interested on how to treat your parents, okay, how to treat your brother, okay. So that's a more important question than why apple will drop from the tree, not going up. They don't ask this kind of question. So, okay, before I go through, I hope we already cover most of the subject on the this article, and then we will go back, and then unless you have an urgent question, and I plan to read some text on this one. So I know probably to some people will feel a little bit boring, but but I think that's one of the purpose, okay, for reading the ancient text. Yeah. So first, this one, this section, since we talk about heaven, so we focus on the chapter 17. Okay. I think he total have 55 chapters, and then if you stay here for another few years, we probably will cover most of them. Okay, so this one is very interesting. Okay, he talked about discourse on heaven. This one is not included in the article, but I think that's important to introduce on the very first paragraph. Just like the reason I like him, because he is very straightforward. So on the chapter 17, Discourse on Heaven. First sentence, he talks about the activity of heaven are constant. They do not persist because of Yao. Remember, is the Sage King. They do not, I think I should use, they do not perish because of Jie, which is tyrant. So, which is very straightforward. He said that's the heaven, okay? Doesn't matter you have a Sage King or tyrant. They all act as a constant. There's no, totally different from what traditional Chinese talk about the mandate of the heaven. Okay, basically it's nothing like this. He talked about they are constant. The matter is a Sage King or tyrant. They are the same. So I will skip most of the example here, but draw his conclusion on the first paragraph of this chapter. And so one who understands clearly allotments or distinction of heaven and the humans can be called the person of ultimate achievement. The important thing is want people to make a clear line between what's heaven, what's human. So that's his first paragraph on this chapter. I think it's very clear what he wants to say here. So anybody want to help me read this one that's included in the text? But I decide, okay, because from my lesson, I think last month we talked around and everybody complained about the translation is terrible. So I decide to look at different translation and come with kind of my own translation. Okay, I still include in the text translation. That's the one everybody read from the article, but that's the one I make it. Okay, I kind of combine them together. So anybody want to volunteer to read it?
I'll read it.
Please, thank you.
You're saying this is in the text?
That's in the text, but I kind of modify it. Okay.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah. Okay, all right. The type is a little small, but I have my glasses on, so I should be able to do this fluidly. Oh, thanks. One performs the rain sacrifice and it rains. Why? I say. There is no special reason why. It is the same as when one does not perform the rain sacrifice and it rains anyway. When the sun and moon suffer eclipse, one tries to save them. When heaven sends drought, one performs the rain sacrifice. One performs divination and then decides on important affairs. This is not for the sake of getting what one seeks, but rather to give things proper form, to gloss over the matter. Thus, Xunzi, Prince Gentleman, looks upon this as a proper form, which I guess means gloss over. But the common people look upon it as supernature, or supernatural, or supernature. He who looks upon it as proper form is good. He who looks upon it as supernature is ill.
Okay, so that's the translation I put it. I hope it makes more sense. Basically, I think most of people probably already get what talking about. Basically, talk about example. You worship rain, just as you don't worship, you still get rain. That's no causal relationship on that. And the important here I like to focus is the word "wen" here. He is not, I think it's Claudio talk about, is he atheist? He is not atheist. He still believes we still have to worship. Okay, he's talking about divination, and you have to perform divination and then decide on important affairs. Okay, when the important, you still do divination. Okay, but you have to know it's just give a proper form. Okay, the prince, okay, which is the ruler. Okay, who knows? Okay, it's just a form. Okay, everything is decided by you, the human. Human is doing it. The proper form is just that the common people know. Okay, they may feel it's a supernatural. Just give a form. So that's the word. I think at the beginning, a lot of questions raised about the word "wen." Okay, gloss over, give something. So I think that's Xunzi's religious view. Okay, on that, you do it, give a form. Okay, but everything still depends on yourself.
So then, Jason, I have to ask you, well, I'll wait for my turn. I'll raise my hand, but I wanted to ask you about organizing. Because why don't you think of that as organizing? You said that Xunzi doesn't want an organized society, but if you're saying that form is necessary for the common people, that's a way of organizing. That ritual makes
Probably I don't use the right word. Okay, the form basics we talk about a ritual. Okay, I'm not talking about a formation of the people. Okay, so that's why the another translation talk about a gloss to gloss over the matter. So kind of like polish, make it look, okay, the way it is, not organized picture. At least my understanding is not organized the picture. People, if you organize, they become a not teaching the. So wen, okay, this word wen still have an educational purpose. Okay, you let common people know that's the way to respect your ancestors. That's the way to ask heaven to give you rain. Okay, but as a prince or Xunzi, you know. Okay, okay, but that's everything is on your own hand. So I hope I explained to you.
It's an interesting view.
You mean Xunzi has an interesting view?
You have an interesting view.
Oh, I have an interesting view. Thank you. Okay, okay. Yeah, please comment. You know, if everybody not disagree or not, then that's my view. Yes, and I'm not sure. You know, I think here we have a group. Somebody can read Chinese. Please give his view. You know, her view. I welcome. You know, that's because they wrote in the ancient Chinese. So. It's hard to tell, you know, what it really means. Yeah. And one thing I'd like to mention is about the ill and the good. I think another translation put a good fortune and a bad fortune, but neither of one are good one. Okay, so I still not sure what would be the right word. Okay, so basically talking about if you consider this kind of worship as or divination as a proper form, which is good, recommended, and if not do it, consider as a supernature. He's not talking about bad fortune or bad. Basically talking about probably not so smart. Okay, that's the common people, uneducated people doing. Okay, don't worry. And for us, okay, intellectual elite. Okay, we know. Okay, that's it. Okay. Question? Because I'm going to move to the second text, which is the same. Okay, and I really don't like the article's translation because this one's supposed to be a song. Okay, okay, like a poem. Okay, so it's a couplet. Okay, but it translated sounds a little bit strange. That's why I make it a little bit change. Okay, so the original. So that's why I make it. So basics, Xunzi, the same thing, after talking about the religious worship, okay, and then he provide this kind of why not, 1, 2, 6, why not question, okay. So anybody want to read it for me? Audrey, can you read it?
Bill has his hand up. He's had his hand up.
No, I don't want to
while.
read it. I'm not a reader.
No,
Yeah, no feel
okay,
like
to
you
exalt.
want to ask question. Okay, so now we have Audrey read it and then have a feel ask question. So.
Okay, to exalt heaven for and long for it, why not nourish things and oversee them? To obey heaven and praise it, why not adopt oneself to the environment and use it? To hope for the proper time and wait, why not seize opportunity and act? To rely on things and increase them, why not develop their powers and transform them? I like that one. To think of things and compare them, why not look after things and keep them? To wish that things may come to pass, why not take what one has and bring them to pass? Therefore, if a person neglects what men can do and seeks for what heaven does, he fails to understand the nature of things.
Thank you, Heaven. Thank you, thank you, Audrey. So we talk about heaven, basically. I think it's clear.
Call me Heaven.
So Phil, please ask your question, please.
Yeah, I'm beginning to understand him better because of these explanations. I think he was actually a very smart guy, and I think he was playing politics in this sense. Okay, I think he is actually a radical thinker, sort of like his rough contemporary in the West, like Aristotle, and I would look at the things as they are and do it. But he was also in a tradition, the Chinese tradition, in which there was so much respect, I guess, even at that time, of Confucius, that he had to play the role of, let's say, we have to also honor that as well, right? So he's sort of smuggling in a kind of early science. Not the science we have, ever since, let's say, Galileo, but the science back then of just observing the world and drawing a conclusion. But you also have to, because the tradition was so strong with this looking back, he didn't want to actually upset the apple cart, but he wanted to, in a sense, ride on top of that and produce this sort of like slight difference without making it sound quite as radical as it ought to be, so people would just reject it altogether. So I think he did manage to smuggle in, start observing how things really happen. Okay, now there is one problem, however, like when people pray and the rain didn't come, or they sometimes come, they sometimes didn't come, that is actually not a proof that that's wrong. It could just be that they pray wrong, they had the wrong intent when they pray. So there's many ways to actually disprove that argument, because there's other possibilities. But the fact that he introduced the fact that, yeah, there's other way of thinking, I think that's a good idea. And he was actually quite radical, because the people are stuck in the tradition. How else can you pry them off that tradition without also respecting it? Because you would just be thrown out of the academy altogether.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Good point. And I'd like to respond to about the political thing. And actually, all philosophers at that time are political. Okay, they have the political purpose, because remember, he's from Qi, the rich country, and they have the kind of like a university. So they serve as a government advisor. So of course, and their ultimate goal is get a job. Okay, just like Confucius. Okay, they are not like Socrates, or like Plato's. They just do philosophy. So they, of course, they have the political. And about the science, Chinese. I think this also mentioned about Chinese are not focused on so-called science, which is useless science. They talk about useful science. So if you compare, okay, before 18th century, technology or science-wise, China, or even include India, are much more advanced in Western Europe. Okay, and one of the reasons is Chinese don't focus on something nonsense, which is God. Okay, sorry, about God or metaphysical thinking. Okay, and worry about why apple drop down, not going up. In the center, the universe center is Earth or Sun. What's the difference, right? Let's figure out how to treat your mother, your father, and how to make a horse running. Okay, so I think that's more important. We have Joseph, please.
Yeah, no, I think this is clearing it up for me a bit, is that it seems like he's just focused on concretes a lot more than traditional Eastern thinkers. And essentially, this is where he starts to say that we're wasting time if we're thinking about the unknown, and to just act as opposed to, just, sit back and kind of contemplate the universe, or as to why, or even to think about the metaphysical. I mean, am I understanding that correctly?
I think you are absolutely right.
Okay. And then, so I'm trying to see why he, and I know we moved past this already, but how, well, it's about the good and evil. Actually, I'll come back to it. I'll come back to it later. All right.
Thank you. Claudia, please.
Yeah, I agree with what Joseph just said. It's more, puts more emphasis on the concrete, on what's on earth rather than in heaven. Beyond. Why depend on something that is beyond, the otherworldly, when you have the solutions, the resources here on earth, right? It takes a more proactive stance rather than a passive stance, right? Because it says here at the bottom here, if a person neglects what man can do, right? Self-sufficiency, and seeks for what heaven does, he fails to understand the nature of things, right? So it's kind of like you need to, I don't want to use the word exploit, but that's what it's implied here. Exploit the natural environment for your own use, right? To progress, right? Forward. Similar to what Confucius's way of thinking in a way regarding the afterlife. Confucius refused to talk about what is the afterlife like. Is there life after that? Because it's unknown to him. He didn't know, so he refused to talk about something that is unknown. So he insisted, he preferred to focus on the here and now, on earth, normal life, right? And I just wanted to comment on what Alex said earlier regarding Confucianism, kind of like holding society back. I'm neutral on that. I don't know, but I understand why some women may kind of dislike Confucianism. Especially the stronger women, because Confucianism does tend to be patriarchal. And Wu Zetian, the female empress, she hated Confucianism. She was a Buddhism for that reason, because it was patriarchal. They wanted to subjugate women, right? She ruled China in the 8th century. She was the most powerful woman in China at that time. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Claudia. But I will put your interest comment, but I believe Alex will disagree. Where's Alex? Still there? Are you still there? Yeah. I think Alex.
Yeah, I'm here.
I think she will disagree, because she's again Confucius, and not because she's female. Because
I'm looking from more of a historical point of view. But of course his Confucius thoughts on on this patriarchal society it's an ancient idea, and I think people just put too much emphasis on it, that it never progressed and never gave the females, more power. But nevertheless, throughout history, there are a lot of powerful female figures. Very rare, but there were. But yeah, definitely Confucianism definitely put a damp on feminism and female status in society. But compared to the Western society, I think the same thing happened. The female in the Western world, they also didn't have as much say as much as men. So it's kind of that's how things were.
No, yeah, sorry. No, I wasn't referring to Alex. I'm not saying that that's why she said those things, because she's a female. I was referring to Wu Zetian, the Empress of China.
Yeah, I have a comment on that.
And other, but Confucianism isn't the only patriarchal ideology or religion or philosophy. Judaism and Christianity too, they put a lot of more importance on the male than the female, right? Like original sin was blamed on the female, right? Not the male, right? And who's going to inherit heaven? The 100,000 males, right? So it's not just Confucianism. The ancient philosophies, many of them are patriarchal in that way. Yeah.
Okay, so let's put this one on hold, and then that's it for the another 15 minutes to discuss. Let's finish up. And whose hands up? Anybody's hands up? Okay, it's just down. Okay, let me finish a few. Then we have some subject we can discuss, and like this interesting subject about the female Wu Zetian, and then that's also interesting. But before we go to this one, and because I spent time to think about this, so I want to show everybody on this. Sorry. Yeah. So basically, we talk about. I think the key thing I get from this article is about the revolutionary conservatism. Okay, that's how the author not criticize, categorize Xunzi. So I draw a chart because I'm engineering background, so I always like to draw a chart. So if you draw the line, and the one way is the progressiveness, and the other way is conservative, and talk about religious approach, about talking about religious and heaven, or talk about human and the human psychology. So if you look at on this one, I will, of course, that's why the author put the Xunzi on the left lower side, which is focused on human and which is conservative, which are opposite than Mencius, okay, as a conservative, okay, but it's more focused on the heaven, okay, religion, okay, this thing, and that's their opposite. And if you see Mencius and the other person, I will find a chance to introduce so-called Mozi, okay. He is a different person. He is progressive, okay. He tried to change the world, but he all believe the heaven, the demand. He is so-called utilitarian, and then but believe God, okay, believe the divine power, okay. So it's a very strange combination, but we were talking about this one more like religious movement. So remember we talked about Mencius. Mencius never criticized Xunzi because Xunzi is much later than Mencius. Mencius criticized Mozi a lot, okay. Even they all believe the heaven, but Mencius criticized Mozi because he thinks Mozi has a kind of the Christian love, okay, like abake. So you love everybody as your brother. So Mencius criticized Mozi. This kind of love is like animal, you know, no father, no mother, okay, no brother, they all the same. So Mencius' idea of love is progressive, okay, so they have the degree. So you love your father, mother most, then your uncle, then your brother, whatever, that's all the way through, okay. So next week, we will talk about Han Fei, who is the student of Xunzi, okay, you can see on this chart. He, same as Xunzi, he doesn't believe God, only believe the human power, but he moved to another way. He wanted to change the tradition. Okay, so basically he's moved forward. So turn out the successful one is Han Fei, okay, the legalism, which conquered the entire China, but they only last for 15 years, okay, and what's the reason? That's another subject we can talk about for many Chinese scholars argue this one for 1,000 years, so we can talk about. Any question or anything? We almost to conclude today, and then we can go the second step of discussion. Okay.
I have a question, and may I please ask very quick and quick answers?
You haven't mentioned that.
Okay, I have my question is the concept of heaven and mandate of heaven in China. How does it fall into this in what we were speaking today? And could someone just give me a very clear, concise definition, because I've been all the time getting a variety of explanations of what it is. So thank you so much.
Anybody want to answer Alina's question?
I think Madeline had a question. Can we get around to her, please?
Madeline, what's your question? Can you, I didn't see the chat.
Oh, thank you, Dave. Does my voice sound normal now?
Hold on. No, you still echoing. I think I mentioned last time.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, it performs fine on the self-test. I don't know what it is. I was thinking about what you had said about the conservatism, the golden age, and the sort of the materialism, as we would call it now, and also the cynicism of the leadership. That they want the masses to believe in religion. And it really reminds me all of the 1950s here in the United States. There had been a traumatized generation from the First World War raising children, who then went into the Second World War. Both generations came out of that, whoever was left, and all they wanted was to have a stable society where everyone knew their place. And of course, it wasn't a golden age for everyone, but conservatives now look back on that era as a golden age. Would you say it's analogous?
You asked me my question. You want me to answer? Or
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think it's okay. If I take your question correctly, I think it's hard to. I have no answer on that because I think when we categorize a person as a conservatism, I think it's just for convenience, right? Because everybody have a different view of what is conservatism. So free speech in some country is progressive, in some country is conservative, right? So that's the only thing I can answer, and probably I put it this way, I have no no clear answer on this one. I hope you don't mind. We have, do I?
I was actually thinking of conservatism in terms of people who look back on the past as a golden age, because in general, that's what conservatives do, and people who are more liberal, at least in our society, look forward to the future as the golden age that's yet to come.
Well, I think that's still a little, to me, it's still a little bit raw, the different. So, if I base on your definition, well, Xunzi, Mencius, Confucius, they all conservatism, right? And then Han Fei and the most, even they are thinking about progressive. They probably not really look at the future much. They probably look at now. So that's just my point of view, you know. But I think that's a little bit broad general question. I'm not quite sure, you know, how to answer this one in a short time. Yeah. Okay, so
I kind of quick answer about the haven, the Tian and haven.
Okay,
actually,
please.
Yeah, actually,
oh, yeah, I forget this question. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's my question too. I prefer sky. Obviously, Western people, they use sky also, use adage or metaphorically. That's because heaven going to easily misinterpreted like a Christian heaven or kind heaven evil. I would say use sky instead. That's debatable, you know, later on. Second one, the question from I guess Elena about mandate of heaven. If you base the sky, it's the original Tian Ming. Sky and Ming is you can see its fate or destiny. So that perspective, I understand. If from a Dao De Jing, it's Dao. Tian Ming is Dao. I'm going to simplify like that for now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think about sky. Yeah, it's probably a proper translation, but sometimes it become, I don't know. You know, you can kind of like we talk about sky, a physical sky, instead of a divine sky. So it's difficult. We can work on that, but
Well, I have an answer about that, or not an answer. My opinion about that is that it's basically the universe, and I think both East and West, a lot of that aren't religious. If you take the religiosity out of some of these philosophies, the sky, the heavens represent the universe. But the mandate of heaven, I thought, was specifically Chinese, the political system, where it helps the king. The king uses that, the mandate of heaven, to stay in power. It's political. Yeah, so that, but it's still about the universe. So fate and the universe, I think Kevin was right about that.
Yeah, thank you. Let's think about it. It's difficult. I just have to say it's very difficult. And we will work on that. We probably need 10 more sections to figure out. So thank you. We have Joseph and Phil.
So I just have a really quick question coming back to the idea of focusing on concretes as opposed to focusing on the metaphysical. And I kind of was able to form my question is that my understanding is that he thinks human beings are innately evil because they follow their desires, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, if you're following your desire, the concretes actually make a whole lot, like it seems like it's almost you're being encouraged to act only in your self-interest, and you're only focused on what is here and what is now, what you can create, as opposed to thinking about it on more of a metaphysical level. What are the implications of what I'm doing? What are, what is that? So it seems like he's saying that if desire is evil in a sense, but it seems like he's also telling us to follow our desires at the same time by focusing on only concretes. Does that make sense?
I let other people to answer because it's a little bit
abstract.
Yeah, abstract. Yeah, put it this way. Yeah, you ask abstract question about concrete. So, but anyway, who's next? Phil, please.
Yeah, I'm going to give a limited defense for Confucianism.
Okay, please.
Because I'm not a Confucian, I don't like Confucius, but I'll give it a limited defense. If you look at the two longest surviving civilization, is Egypt, roughly 5,000 BC, or at least 4,000 BC, to about 600 BC. That's quite a long time. The other one is China. So therefore, particularly when you were beginning to write in a period when there was a lot of turbulence, what was important to you? Is it to be progressive and move on and continue fighting or whatever about arguments and all that, or was it better to construct a society in which you stabilize whatever there is in order to survive and sustain itself? There's a reason why Egypt and China sustained itself for a long time, because they had something that was orderly and constructed. Certainly people suffer, no question about that. That's why I'm against it. But on the other, Egypt fell because Egypt had a system so well worked out that, in a sense, who conquered Egypt? It was Alexander, the student of Aristotle, who thought about knowledge, not only knowledge in relationship with power, but knowledge. And so he opened up, not him, but his later generation opened up the library at Alexander, which collected all the knowledge. So in that sense, how about China? China fell under the system so heavily that it excluded, and for the beginning it was okay because we know everything. We were ahead of the world, but finally they fell behind, and now they finally are waking up that maybe they're not ahead after all, and they're tripping over themselves to learn Western technology, really, and to a certain degree, abandon Confucianism to a degree. They can't because it's just too strong. to abandon it. So therefore, you have to understand the conditions, the social condition, what is best overall. Just like have 10 years, 20 years, 50 years of just extraordinary explosion of understanding, or is it better to have 4,000 years of stability in which everybody could live to a moderate degree of peace? So that's my limited defense. But like I said, I'm not a Confucian, but nonetheless, you could see the wisdom within that if you want to actually protect society or civilization as such.
All right, thank you for your opinion. And then next we'll go to Claudia. But before you speak, I'd like to respond for your previous talk about Wu Zetian. Okay, just give you some historical background. Okay, Wu Zetian as a female emperor, is the only female ruler. Okay, officially ruler. Okay, in Chinese 2,000-year history. Okay, because she is replaced Tang Dynasty. Tang Dynasty is about 600 AD. The last name is Li. Okay, so they are same last name as Taoism, Laozi. Okay, they call Li the same last name. That's the reason they respect. Okay, Taoism. Okay, and then Wu Zetian kind of like replace the Tang Dynasty. So she has to find something different. So that's why she become the Buddhism thinking, which is close. So that's some historical background. But if you say because it's female, she's against that, that's another way to think about it. But I just provide what I know on this. So Claudia, please, that's your turn.
Yeah, I was gonna. Well, okay, yeah. Just quickly to respond what you just said. She, according to the readings, I read the book on Wu Zetian, her biography. One of the reasons why she hated Confucius, she saw it as a threat, right? Because she was a ruler, and she saw threats everywhere. That's why she had many of her enemies, almost all of them executed, because she saw threats everywhere to her power. She wanted to hold on to her power, and she saw that that particular ideology, because it was patriarchal in nature, as a threat, right? But there's other reasons, of course, as you just mentioned. I agree with that, yes, because there could be more than one reason, right?
Oh, yeah.
But regarding the mandate of heaven, I believe that it used to be, it was restricted or reserved for the males, I believe, because according to yin-yang philosophy, yin-yang, right? Yang, which is male, is also linked to heaven, right? Heaven and male is yang, earth and female is yin. So I believe that it does not apply to females back then, the mandate at heaven. So the rulers, the male rulers, they had the mandate of heaven, the right to rule according to heaven, which gave them, I believe, the power or the privilege, or whatever other word you want to use, to rule the land, right, the country. If I'm wrong, please correct me. That's just based on what I read. Yeah.
Okay, nothing wrong. I think it's great. Thank you. About yin yang, a lot of people interested on that. I'm planning to I think in August I have a section to do the I Ching. Okay, I find the app. Okay, I think that's probably a good way to start. So I work on that. So we have I think let's go to Kevin and Yan.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, hold this. And actually follow conversation, Alex and Elena. Go. It's good. For me, I have, jump box thinking about the religious politics. For example, people think about, let's say, like President Xi, or it's like he, like everything of China. It's not. It's 1.3 billion people. 4, now it's jumped, more. So if you look at the ordinary people, I would say that's a building. That's Confucius and Dao De Jing. That's part of culture. One thing we have, a pain story recently is a cultural revolution. It's 1966 to 1970. 6 or 78. So that period of time. Other than that, never. Even that, you cannot cut your culture. Then you eventually still came back. However, one thing I would say consider globalization and modernization is a change a lot. I believe our culture. So it's totally like generation is a change unimaginable. So I could give you, like I consider the Chinese history about the last 50 years is compared to Western 200 years. It used to be from one thing, from Li. Today we talk about Li, right? That's root. It used to be we cannot directly call Jason first name. I have to call Mr. Pen. From that perspective, now we can sound talk to let's say if his son can ask Jason or something, and we used to be also respectful elderly hierarchy, and also on the top of the boss care about the other bottom hierarchy. However, this materialized. You pay me money, I do it. So even if you another cultural perspective called lie flat, laying flat, which means I don't care anything. You can be very close to nihilism. Basically, those things it's changed dramatically. What's the like mandate of heaven? So it's culture change a lot.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think all the tradition has been changed. We can bring up this subject. Let me figure out what would be the best way. The modern subject sometimes is difficult. Okay, so let's have Yan. Okay, you haven't spoke yet today, so Yan, are you there? No. Okay, so right now time is 3 o'clock.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, please, yeah.
All right, yeah, and thank you. I appreciate you answered this question, and that is that building on what you were talking about, the two of the philosophers thought that human nature is generally good, and then the other two were generally bad. I was wondering how do they see people with power? How do they control corruption anyway? Corrupting of the original intent, or remaining humble when you have power?
Anybody want to answer this question? I just give a quick answer. Okay.
Could you please repeat, Ian? Could you please repeat the question? I didn't get it.
Sure. The question is, how do you curb corruption in government or people with power?
Okay, I will give
I have something kind of refer to.
Okay.
One thing, let's see, doesn't matter socialism, communist party, or capitalist party, or liberal party, who can govern bad? So that's one I heard from the standpoint of view from Chinese perspective. They say, okay, we can govern better if you don't build real way, not like a 20 year, 10 year. We're going to 2 months, 2 year finished. That's their speed. So you can see lots. If you search maybe Chinese speed or real way, you're gonna lose that. Another one, this is religious perspective. I would say in Chinese official government, they don't use communist that like great slogan used anymore. It's not like, and if you live in China, more you look like here more in China more capitalized than Western. It's price. When I'm in Toronto, Canada, here it's like a socialism. We got a welfare, get a welcome, it's kind of thing, more equalized than China. So it's word and things. It's not a fact, not the truth.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
So I just want to remind everybody right now it's 3 o'clock, and I'm going to stop recording now, and then